So, good evening and welcome to Dusty Feet. This is our special series, The Sons of the Father. It's January 26th, 2023. And during this series of episodes, my dad, John Wern, my brother, Jim Wern, and of course myself, will be discussing The Chosen. And we'll be chatting about things that impacted us along our journey. So, welcome to The Sons of the Father. And we have Outside the Class, where we want you to review the material before we start chatting about it. It's kind of like homework. We're still in the Matthew series with Tim Mackey. Next Tuesday, we'll be chatting about episode 25, Death and Taxes. I do link all the videos for each week in advance on TheDustyFeet.com, and that'll be on the Outside the Class page. Those videos premiere every Tuesday at 7 p.m. In the description below are links to all the audio, video, and source documents that we use here on the Dusty Feet. We want to make sure that any material we use here is properly credited to those folks who work so hard to bring it to us. Without their efforts, the learning we do here does not happen. So don't forget to subscribe. Click that bell icon if you want a reminder. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place we can safely explore the endless ways of God, interconnection of His creation, where belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. So here we go with our Sons of the Father on the Dusty Feet. So here again is our double entendre. We are the sons of our Father, and we are all sons of the Father. So, gentlemen, welcome again to our Sons of the Father. So I want to bring up three things real quick for me that worked on this, and it was one, Shabbat was not an episode title that I was expecting, to be honest. Two, Shabbat Shalom, not a phrase that I expected to hear. And three, and I thought was wonderful, was Shabbat was a time to honor three things: family, our people, and God. And I found those liberating points, issues. So, that said, let's kick us off. Dad, with this episode of Shabbat, what jumped out to you?
Well, I've really enjoyed this episode. There was so much in it, when we were talking earlier about the it really touched on the lives and the activities, the dailiness of their lives in that time, and it paralleled to me. It paralleled a lot of us and what we do each day, and there's work to be done. There's playing to be the growing to be done, discovery to be done. Um, we saw Mary in a whole different light of from the last episode and the depression that she lived in daily, and to see that change. That's the kind of change that I have seen people really receive when they receive Christ, when they realize that they don't have to live like they're living, whatever that looks like. And I think the writers do a great job of making their lives like ours. And I think that's why it's been so popular, why the series has been so popular, because people can identify with it. They can laugh with them, they can cry with them. They're not perfect, none of them. And yet And yet Jesus pursued them right into the bar, right up to the bar, and puts his hand on Mary. And that's the way my experience from my own life. And when you've been around as long as I have, you've seen it happen in other people's lives where why would you even pursue me? I had no interest in the gospel. I spent my entire childhood in Catholic school. It's not about the Catholics, it's just about religion. And I didn't, and yet he reached out to me. And that will for obviously forever impact me and you
Mhm.
guys because then you lived in a different household after that. And watching Mary change gets me excited again about the reality of Christ in our lives. And I thought it was humorous to me when Nicodemus, Nico, found out that that uh, somebody had seen Mary and said she's different, she's changed, she's not who she was, and he rushes right out to connect with her, and does not get the answers that he was expecting, as happens. Um, well, how have you changed? What went on? Well, how long after I, had nothing to do with you. Well, that's a slap. Had nothing to do with you. And that's, sometimes when we spend time with somebody and they come to know Christ, and isn't that what you know, what did I say that really impacted you? And they say, no, it wasn't you. It was it was meeting Jesus.
Mhm.
And that's such a um, it's unexplainable until it happens. You cannot tell somebody because he's so unique in each how he approached each one of us in our lives is so different. And I look forward to, as the episodes go on, that we can share some of those things of how he came after us, how he pursued us, how he sought us
Mhm.
out. But I identify most with Peter, and I think this episode really came alive to me when first he dumps on his brother because his brother is trying to say, Peter, don't do this. Don't turn in your friends. Don't turn on your friends. It's not, it's your own doing. And then when he goes home, and Eden says, I mean, a wife can spot those things. Your mother, my wife, did that to me and asked me, what's going on? What's the matter? And just like Peter, I would say, oh, nothing. I'll take care of it. Don't you worry about it. You just take care of the house. I'll take care of, the rest. Knowing that if I wasn't too careful, we wouldn't have a house because of those mistakes. And if it hadn't happened to me, I think I would have said, it's time to, uh, if I didn't know the stories beforehand, I would have said, get rid of this guy because he's a loser. He's not going to come around, and yet he does come around. And I did, and I changed, and he changed. Why? Not because of anything that you could put your hand on, but Christ, what he did for us, and
Mhm.
wanting to change because of that. Because I want to be like him. I want to be the kind of man, father, husband that that he calls us to be in Scripture. So, you know, long answer to a short question, but that's where I'm at. That's where
Okay.
it hit me.
Jimmy, um, and anything obviously tied to that since it's a series, since it's an episode. But what anywhere that jumped out to you?
Well, you had mentioned at the beginning the surprise of their use of Shabbat Shalom. I'm curious though, why did it surprise you that they would use Shabbat Shalom when that was a common phrase back then? Is it just because it's not typical in today's depictions or something?
Yes,
I thought
yes,
of it,
yes,
so I'm
yes, yes,
asking.
for sure. Because understand, up to this point in this series, the the Jewishness of Jesus is is at worst um, ignored or actually shunned or
Mhm.
abused. At best, it's downplayed and not talked about. That's his best part. Okay, up to this, right? Especially in a churchy um, show context. So to hear the to hear one, the title was Shabbat. That surprised me. Shabbat Shalom, surprise again. And then all the prayers in there are all the Jewish prayers. You listen in the background, whether it's one they're actually saying or you're listening to it as it's a background noise. You can get what's going on. They're all actual Jewish prayers. So um, to capture the reality of the community, the fact
Mm.
that this is a Hebrew
Mhm.
community, and so to grasp and engage that, I was
Yeah,
intrigued with. So
yeah, no, that makes
yeah,
sense.
good one.
Interesting because, and we've had discussions before, looking at what we traditionally in the Protestant church call Old Testament,
Yeah.
um, versus Hebrew scriptures,
Mhm.
which is really a more appropriate term, I would say, for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and yet, it's still uncomfortable for me to say it. I am hearing it more
Hmm.
in some of the circles that I'm in,
Oh
that
yeah.
they're beginning to change their vocabulary to be more reflective of, and I don't know if it might be some of the whole um, not wokeness, but the diversity, the DEI stuff that's going on corporately, and just the appreciation for diversity,
Yeah.
that might be making the church a little more aware. I don't know. I'm curious your thoughts on it. But that being said,
Hmm.
beginning to see it more and enjoying that.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of this particular episode, what was connecting with me, um, kind of like what Dad was saying, that there's things that you go, yeah, that's me. Um, the and I used this word last time, juxtaposition, which isn't a normal everyday term, but the placement in the story, and that to me, that's what makes Dallas such a great story writer.
Yeah.
And whether it was his writers that were doing this or him, I don't know in terms of direction. But when he aligns two different either characters or events in the story, and their juxtaposition to each other, with a particular topic. This one being Matthew and Peter when they were dealing with um, the Roman government and trying to justify themselves
Mm.
for what they did.
Mhm.
Uh, I I identify with that way too much, because it is so easy for us. I remember back when I was going through recovery and saying, "Hey, I'm not as bad as these guys,"
Mm.
because I was setting the standard of what bad was,
Mhm.
and God's going, there's really no difference between you and them when it comes to the law.
Yeah.
It's not sort of broke the law. It's like, are you pregnant or kind of pregnant? There's no kind of pregnant. Okay. There's no kind of sin. It's just you missed the mark or you made the mark. That's it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Matthew was justifying his actions. Peter was justifying his actions. Yet when you come back to what is God's standard, we're all falling short,
Mhm.
every single one of us,
Mhm.
Mm.
and why we need God's grace. And
Mhm.
Bob, earlier you mentioned um, the word redemption, the fact that they used that word. Um, Dad, you were talking about transformation, that people can change. Those are the words that excite me, to think that God can redeem us, that we can be transformed into the image of Christ, that we can change. That's the gospel. That's the good news.
Amen.
That can happen. And I know it because I've experienced it. And it's fun to see in this story, somebody like Mary, who's excited about her transformation. We talk about the fact that some of the best evangelists are brand new converts, people who have recently been transformed because of that excitement. And you're seeing that with her. And it's like, I want to catch that same passion and go, now I don't want to fall back into the, oh yeah, that's for somebody else to do. Evangelism isn't my gift. No, my privilege is to share my story. And in that, show people what God can do. And we're seeing that in the lives of these people, in these episodes. So that was mostly for me.
Yeah, no, that it's an interesting point on you don't the story as it's playing out, right? The redemption point is interesting. That word we brought up, we hadn't talked about here yet, was
Right.
that it's the phrase that they used when they talked about Mary being her her possession, and even Nicodemus used the word exorcism, which I thought was interesting because that's very Catholic like, but it draws a picture. It's a word that draws a picture. Okay, a lot of baggage goes with it, but we'll just bite that the word draws a picture. But their choice to use the word redeemed rather than healed. Okay, so it was, and the Pharisees used it, and and then Mary herself says it to Nicodemus. Okay, so I thought it was an interesting choice of term. Because we might even bite on this particular one, that we're talking about somebody that has made something that was somebody else's their own. How that happens, price paid, release from. Usually that phrase is release from. There's an indebtedness, something that has control over something, and I'm removing that control, removing that indebtedness because I have paid a price. There's a kinsman redeemer is very much the Jewish community very much understands redemption in its practical form. We have it. It's very esoterical in our churchy side of things, rather than in Hebrew culture, it's tangible, it's visceral, it's you pay a price. There's a kinsman redeemer. If your brother is, then you pay a price to redeem them. That's why they use the phrase kinsman redeemer. Okay, there's a purpose for the phrase, and to see them engage at that level, I really found enjoyable. Again, the upside down thinking. We have Nicodemus, and he when he goes to Mary, it's interesting because he doesn't hear about Mary through the grapevine. They actually call Nicodemus because they think, because Nicodemus was in the last episode, the previous episode, had gone to try to call out this demon, this exorcism, right? As he put it, take a different angle on that, right? And it didn't work. And so then when he hears about, when they call him back and say, we want to confirm a miracle. So, and you were the one that did it. So they want to go. And he says, pump the brakes. Let me go see. And they were like, but why? Why? And he says, maybe it happened and she might slide back in.
That's right.
And I want to remember that, because I'm going to loop back around to that, to something that was said, that was brought up. So he goes to see her and then has the interaction, and she finds out that there was another person that did it. It wasn't Nicodemus. And rather than Nicodemus taking an affront to it, which is possible, that's a possible action. It really is. He's intrigued, and he wants to know who can, because he understands that can only be done by a godly man. Because he gets that no man can serve. In other words, a demon can't cast out a demon, which was an argument scripturally. We have a story about that. And so in this one, he understands that, and that intrigue to go. You mentioned a point about sometimes the new convert is the evangelist. Now I'm going to somber the moment for a moment here, okay? And it's more from a semantic standpoint, I guess, in that is that we are called to give an accounting. I think, again, the word evangelize has a lot of baggage to it. We were talking offline about words that have baggage that you carry into conversations. Because then what happens is, if you're looking at it from an evangelistic standpoint, and then that person slips, as the word we like to use, then there's a challenge with somebody looking from the outside in is not understanding. Yeah, fair? So I think we put too much weight on that new person. And Mary does a great job in this of deferring a little of that. And he wants to know who it is. She says, first of all, I'm not going to tell you. Second, because he asked me not to, because it's not at the time yet. But she is, you're right, going around the neighborhood. Everybody knows that she's in this. But the action isn't her going around saying, I'm healed, for lack of a better term. We'll just use that loosely. She goes around engaging back in community and letting her actions show this change.
She's living differently is what she's doing.
Exactly. Her choice to live differently. That the challenge that we're going to see with Peter down the road is his, we're at the tipping point here in this episode. We know something has to change. Right? With Peter, it's painfully obvious. That's not going to work. Matthew's struggling with his identity. Yep. Mary is very comfortable where she's at, and she's excited about engaging and learning and living differently, and not afraid to try. And to be fair, her community is embracing her.
Yeah.
Okay? Because it could easily be quite the opposite. Now, let's also take a stretch back, because I just mentioned something about community. She's probably not hanging out in what they called the red district. That's what Nicodemus and the Pharisees called it. So we'll use their term. I doubt she's hanging out in the red district, but she's definitely in a community close by. Yeah. And that community is willing, knowing a little bit about her past, and they're willing to embrace her.
I think that's a great point for us in the church, that when somebody does change and begin, Mary's nervous, she's scared, she's almost, there's an innocence about her in there, but yet she still has the chutzpah to go out and do a Shabbat and lead it. And going off of what both of you said, I think that's one of the challenges to the church, because we're so in much skeptical, instead of that's between them and God. That's not our job to judge them or measure their growth. Or,
Mhm.
Jim mentioned, being in a recovery program. Same with ours that I'm in. That that's the thing that you don't do. You don't judge others. That's between them and God. And then when Mary does her Shabbat, and I talked about how Jesus just uh, pursues us. Knock on the door. She opens the door, jaw dropped. She doesn't even know his name. She doesn't know anything about him. And he shows up and says, "Can I come in?" And well, actually, I don't know that he says, "Can I come in?" She just it just there's awkwardness about it, and then she invites him in, and everybody knows what happens. But it's a beautiful thing when uh, that whole that circle, that when Jesus met her first, pursued her right into the bar, and now he's here in her home when she is making these changes, and she's encouraging. She says, "No, no, you do it," and he's, "No, you." He wants us to take the step. He wants us to join in, as you're saying, in community, and the community is to be around each other and build each other up, not tear each other down or point fingers, but to be there.
Yeah.
So,
Hey,
thank
Jim,
you.
did you notice that the tip off that um, that you're going to see Jesus in a little bit, which I kind of like that little point. Do you see it coming? Is when two of his um, he doesn't.
Students.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that that determination hasn't been made yet, but yet
Right.
let's use the phrase to do that. And they show up at the door unbidden, meaning nobody asked them to be there, and yet the um, the you see a culture element played out that is very common in Jewish households today. It's very real that you the more people the merrier at Shabbat.
Mm.
We'll clear a place at the table. There's more than enough food for you.
Mhm.
Um, and they come to the door, and you get a hint when they throw their names out. Um, James and Thaddeus, and you go, for those obviously in expectation mode, are like, we've heard those names before. Uh, voila. So
Yeah.
it was an interesting element in it that I thought was intriguing.
The other thing that I'm processing here, and Dad, you were talking about community in the church, and the need there. There's also a side of us that sometimes feels like we're the only community out there. And if you go back to the first
Yeah.
episode, Mary had community in the
Mhm.
bar.
Oh,
People
yeah.
loved her. People watched out for her. She experienced it there.
Yeah.
Now, I would say it probably wasn't the healthiest community, in terms of maybe there were ways they were enabling some of the dysfunction that she
Mhm.
was experiencing.
Mhm.
Um, but it was there. And I've
Mhm.
seen community in other places where people really watch out for each other.
Oh, yeah.
One in our culture right now, the LGBTQ plus community
Right.
is very much a community.
Yeah.
Um, we don't have the only community out there. We have a community that's offering something different, and that's what we're beginning to see, even with what's going on here, on in this episode at the end with Shabbat, is helping us to see a different kind of community. One, like you guys had touched on, the church isn't as welcoming as it should be. And so we need to look at that. That's why I think a lot of these other communities thrive so well, is because they're willing to take anybody. Gangs are a community, and they'll take whoever, and they're very much welcomed there. And we tend to judge, and like you said, that's not our job. We see that in the recovery community. We don't judge. But we also need to look at the fact that we think, hey, if we offer church, people are going to love us because it's community. No, there's lots of community out there.
Mm-hmm.
We're offering something more.
Well,
and we need to make sure that.
Yeah, more. Okay, so here's a question. I love where you're going with this. So, and we'll leave this as the hanger that we're going as we get out from here. And I want people to really chew on this for a bit. And you guys can each make a comment on it. As one of the setup is that the community side of the equation is that you're right, 100%. There are people out there engaged in active, supportive communities. So I'll go with Jimmy, what you said about different. So what I'm trying to struggle with, and I want to see the greater church community do is how do we embrace the practice that we see with Yeshua, for instance, when we see Jesus looking at these things, and he's notice his banquet parties look very different than our church front rows. Okay, very different, and I think we fool ourselves that we have community. I do. However, I think there's a resurgence coming, and I think it's in the wind that that's changing.
Yeah.
And then with that, the embracing that I think we hope we see, like communities that you've mentioned, and I know, and you go, if you're not different, and to use the words churchy side, salt and light, there's something beneficial to it. That's the point where you want to come, not want to come. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how we do that. So, Dad, community side for you, what do you see elements of that, the good, the bad, where we're going?
Well, I'm going to pull up the where I've seen it the most. I did a whole lot of mission trips, and when you're in this little group, you're in another country where you don't have, things are foreign to you. You're there for a purpose. You're there to help people, whatever your group is. Ours is working with people with disabilities and giving out wheelchairs and Bibles and those kind of things. But when one of my favorite things to do when we're driving on these, and what should take a half an hour takes 2.5 hours, the thing was, let's hear your testimonies. And they would give their testimonies, and they could talk as long as they wanted to. Well, that wasn't it. But the diversity of the people. This is men and women, guys my age, all the way down to 20s, early 20s, was very common. And that is a community. It's brought together for three things. One, uh, you're in a foreign land, so you need each other. And two, you're there for Christ because you're all believers, and you want to serve Him by serving others. And then three, you're bringing something to give them, to help the people with. And even though there's incredible diversity, everything from literally gals, millionaire men, truck drivers, models, it just goes on and on. And we didn't care about what anybody did. What we cared about was the mission, serving others in Christ's name. and sharing his love. And I think if the church could ever grasp that as individuals, it would be, I think, the way Christ started it and had it originally planned. That's my 2 cents.
Bye, Jimmy.
Interesting when you said that, Dad. The other thing I thought of, and you've said this before, and I've experienced it when I've been on some of the outreaches with you, is over here we've got so much denominational and segregational ministry stuff going on, and over there, when you're in a context where everything is almost against you, it doesn't matter what church you come from or what denomination you come from. We're going to work together because, like you said, it's about the mission. And so you put aside the differences, and you embrace the thing that's common amongst all of you, which is love Jesus, love people. And those lines disappear. And I love that. I think here, I deal a lot with house church, micro church communities. And we're starting to see a big surgence in that because people are wanting to find true connection, community together. And I love seeing that. And I think people want it desperately. I think to have a genuine community, and Bob, you were touching on this, I think, a little bit. It's kind of like in the New Testament when Paul talks about encouraging each other and exhorting each other. It's the very same word. It's the context.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm coming up alongside to hold you up because you're devastated. Sometimes I'm coming up alongside to say, hey, you know what? You might need to think about this differently. And it's the same word because it's about coming up alongside. And when we come up alongside each other in real life, that's what we do. We rub off on each other. Right. And we support each other. We're iron sharpening iron. Yeah. There's some rough edges there sometimes that need to come off. Yeah. But that's what real community does. Yeah. Not just, hey, I'm going to accept you for who you are, and don't worry about anything. No. Yes, we want to be accepting, but we also want to be changing.
Right.
And that involves, asking sometimes the hard questions. And that's what true community, I think, begins to take, that's what it needs to be healthy.
Right.
And to see change.
Yeah. So, yes. Perfect. You've been involved in this at the pastoral level, I think, a bit with when you were in mainstream pastoral care, is the times where certain pastors would get together with other pastors to connect a bit. I kind of wish there was more connection that way. To have the communities then intermingle. They didn't do that, which is an interesting talk. We have Dad. We were talking yesterday or day before about John MacArthur and Jack Hayford would go out for lunch. They were connected in a way, but the communities, of course, not. But I think I'd like to see the communities that the new change in the communities that we're growing. Jimmy, I totally agree. I'd like to see the home groups connect, but not like the church. Don't use that model. Use the model that we see in some of the letters that Paul is addressing through those communities.
Yep.
And I think we have the potential for more change. Yeah. And that's what is at episodes like these, folks. I didn't make the point in the beginning, and I should have, is that we do. It's implied that you've seen the episode before. The link to the episode will be in the description below, of course. But we encourage you to watch not only that link, but the entire series, and engage. They're now in season 3. But we're going to start and plod through one episode at a time as we go through this, because we're going to build on this as the story is building too. it's impacting us in different ways that we're going to build. And you're going to see these stories that we talk about, I think, connect.
Yeah.
I think that's more the case. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here. And we'll wrap this up with a wonderful point to ponder. Where's my point to ponder button? Oh, right there. Thank you very much. With a point to ponder. And this is something that I wanted to bring up before, so I want to bring it up now. And this was from the dictionary on chosen. It's a verb. As a verb, it's past participle of choose, right? As an adjective, chosen, having been selected as the best or most appropriate. And it was interesting because it got, when you start talking about the people in the chosen that we're looking at, and we look at ourselves, and we wonder best or most appropriate. And I think we don't view ourselves the way God views us. So I believe we should engage and embrace God's view of us as chosen, been selected as the best or most appropriate. So thank you for being with us tonight on the Dusty Feet with the Sons of the Father.